I'll call the meeting to order. I don't usually use the gavel, but it seemed right this morning. We have enough members here to form a quorum, so let's take roll.
Bloom.
Here.
Gordon. Here. Bigelow. Patterson. Williams.
Here. We will welcome our newest member, Mr. Patterson, just as soon as he gets here. Mr. Bigelow, sorry, yes. I'm not getting off to a good start. Let's begin with the vote-only calendar. There's a knock at the door. There's Mr. Bigelow. Welcome to Sub3. We're happy to have you aboard, and I really want to thank and congratulate Assemblymember Obernolte on becoming the Vice Chair of Budget, and look forward to working with him in his new position. But Mr. Bigelow, this is a great budget subcommittee. There's a lot of action here, and we really want to welcome you and your future participation.
Great. Well, thank you.
Did you want to add any comments, or are you ready to?
I'm just new to the committee, so I got to figure out the lay of the land, how it all is going to work. When you need items pulled, or
My advice is just don't say anything for a couple of years. Listen, draw it in, and we'll all be good here. Let's begin with the vote-only calendar, shall we? We've had a request. Did you want to make a request on that?
I'd like to make a request, pull item 2, issue 2.
And issue, Mr. Gordon, did you want to pull any? Issue 15, for example?
If we could pull issue 15.
All right. And any others?
And can we also pull item 18?
All right, so 2, 15, and 18. To do that.
I don't know what that one is. So
That's the campus kitchen.
I don't know who suggested that we didn't talk about that one. That's different than a residential facility expansion.
Oh, so I put it in the wrong place. Okay. All right, so we're going to pull issues 2, 15, and 18. Is there a motion for the remaining items?
I would move to approve all of the vote-only items with the exception of item 2, item 15, and item 18.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Let's move to a vote.
We have no votes for them to take 2 sets of votes.
Okay.
Right, so for the ones the Republicans don't want.
All right, so then we're going to ask for a modification of the motion. Apparently there's some disagreement on a couple of items.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me just withdraw the motion. The second agrees to that?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Got a motion for us?
Here we go. I would move that we approve the vote-only items with the following exceptions. Item 2, item 10, item 12, item 15, item 16, item 18, item 19, and item 20.
Issue 13.
And 13.
And item 13.
Pulling all of those?
No.
If I could, item 25.
Separate vote on 25.
Separate.
We'll have a separate vote on item 25.
25, okay.
So then, if I have this correctly, you would be making, Mr. Gordon, a motion on issue 1, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11, 14, 21, 22, 23, 24, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 32, 33, and 34.
I think you missed 17.
I did indeed.
And
17 and 31. Correct. Thank you all. For those of you who are following along at home.
So, anyway, that's my motion.
Now that I know what we're voting on, second.
All right, let's take a vote.
Bloom,
Aye.
Gordon, Williams,
Aye.
Patterson, Bigelow.
Great.
4-0.
Mercifully, that passes.
And I would,
Is there a follow-up motion?
I would move that we approve on the vote-only calendar items 10, 12, 13, 16, 19, 20, and 25.
Second.
Any discussion? We'll have a vote.
Bloom,
Aye.
Gordon, Williams,
Aye.
Patterson, Bigelow.
There you have it. That passes, and we'll now pull issue number 2. That's the fire safety, flame retardants, and building and insulation item.
Do you want to take the bring a CAL FIRE on their recent
We
votes?
could do that. Why don't we hold off on that, and when CAL FIRE comes up, we'll hear that. Should we do that on the others? Yeah, and we'll do that on the others as well as their items come up, and Gabrielle, you'll remind me of that. All right, well, that takes us to the items to be heard, and okay, we're going to start off talking about the drought, and we have 5 different departments who are going to step forward now and give us some perspective on drought funding.
And then lead us off by giving us an overview.
Right.
You might want to
Yep. I think we have the LAO prepared to lead us off on this issue.
Sorry. Yeah.
Ms. Ellers, did you want to begin the?
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. Rachel Ehlers with the LAO. I will be brief since I know you have a long agenda, but I've been asked to just give an overview of this report that we put out at the end of January, beginning of February on the drought, which the sergeant is passing out. I thought I would start with some good news, which is this one-pager from the Department of Water Resources. They will likely speak to this too, so I'll be brief. But it's an update of a figure that's in our report that shows current reservoir conditions. And as you can see, our 2 largest reservoirs are now above their historical average for the date. So that's different from the information that we have in our report from just 6 weeks ago, which Shasta was only at 76% and Oroville only at 66%. So that's good news. But I think one of the main messages that I wanted to communicate today, and I'm sure the rest of the panel as well, is that while getting to average in some areas of the state is good, it's just average, and it's just some areas of the state. As you can see on the figure, particularly along the San Joaquin River Basin, and some of our other reservoirs are still well below average. And after 4 years of drought, or some might say 7 to 8 years of drought with just one wet year in the middle, we still have a lot of catching up to do. So just briefly walking through a few pages in this report, if you turn to page 6 that has some maps of drought severity across the state. You'll see worsening over the several years of drought, as everybody understands. But I just wanted to highlight that the picture for 2015, which shows great areas of the state in exceptional drought status, looks pretty similar to the map today, for at least from last week on the U.S. Drought Monitor website. So we're still dealing with some pretty significant impacts across the state, particularly issues like groundwater basins that have been overdrafted and forests that have been severely impacted by a drought, which again I know you'll hear about from the rest of the panel. So turning to page 14 and 15 of this report, this is really just for your reference, since most of you have lived through all of these decisions over the past several years, but this just provides a timeline of state responses to the drought, both from the executive level, the department level, and certainly from the legislative level as well. Page 16 of the report, the middle fold, figure 5, highlights all of the appropriations and activities that have been funded, particularly in response for the drought. So it doesn't include any of the base operating expenditures or positions within departments. And as you can see, it's $3 billion, $3.1 billion, which is quite notable. You'll see in the first category for water supply, this is primarily funded by Proposition 1 and primarily long-term projects that will probably not have effects during this current drought, but could have effects and hopefully will help in future droughts. The second category, emergency response, about $500 million, has been activities to help humans that have been affected in drought communities, as well as some environmental activities, specifically around fire protection, you'll see is the largest. The third category, water conservation, are activities that have been intended to both help in the current drought as well as future droughts, hopefully having long-term effects. And then the final category, environmental protection, which I think you could also put in the emergency response category, really has been to respond to the pressing crises of this current drought. So really the meat of what I wanted to cover today, if you turn to page 22 of this report, it highlights what the governor's proposals are for the 16-17 budget, the proposals that are before you. You'll see that they are primarily focused around emergency response, again, continuing to help residents and humans affected in drought-affected communities, the largest being anticipating another big fire season. Also, environmental protection, again, which could be thought of in that emergency response. And then there are also some activities in the water conservation category, primarily funded with cap and trade funds and primarily not on your agenda today. So I won't speak to those today. You'll have a separate hearing that discusses those. So I also want to call attention in this figure 8 on page 22, the second line under DWR is to install and remove Delta emergency rock barriers for $42 million. So I just want to highlight that because that comes into our recommendations here. Our assessment overall of this proposal is that it really makes sense at this point to plan for continued drought. While we have had a wet March so far, we know that the impacts have been long-lasting and we don't know what the rest of the water season holds in store. So we think it's prudent to plan for this, and we would recommend approving these proposals. With the exception of the Delta emergency rock barrier, we think you can hold off on that. Don't need to approve it today. Wait and see over the next few months before the budget passes whether that will really be necessary, and perhaps the department has an update for you on that already. And then we'd also recommend holding off on the 4 cap and trade funded water conservation projects, but again, that's not on your agenda today. So beyond just the governor's proposals for this budget, we also have some additional recommendations for you related to drought. Those are summarized on page 27 of this report. And really they fall into 3 areas. The first is that we suggest you identify activities and funding allocations that have been funded on a one-time responsive basis during this drought that maybe need to be ongoing and maybe need to be considered as something that we should be doing in future years to continue even as we start coming out of this drought. That certainly could be a budget year plus 1 decision, but it might be something you might want to think about starting to give indications to departments now so that they could put long-term plans in place. And some items that you may want to think about in that category are things like responding to drinking water shortages, which I know you'll have on your agenda in 2 weeks to discuss in more detail, and perhaps also some of the emergency fish monitoring activities that have happened during the drought. Those might be areas where you might want to consider funding on an ongoing basis to continue collecting data even as we come out of the drought. The second area we'd suggest you may want to take additional action is making sure that we are learning lessons from this drought. We know that this isn't the last drought the state will face. We don't know when the next one will come. So really identifying what has worked well during this drought, what didn't work so well, and what caught us by surprise as a state that we want to be better prepared for next time. So we'd suggest those are the types of questions you may want to ask today in your hearing, but also some formal reporting on that would make sense. And then third, are there additional policy changes that you might want to make now that would help prepare the state better for future droughts? Again, these are things you can talk about today, but really starting to identify. You've made some pretty notable policy changes, ongoing policy changes during this drought, things like new model landscaping requirements, the ability to consolidate poor-performing water systems. These are things that will, policy changes you've made now that will be able to be tools in the state's toolbox in future years. But are there other changes you could make now that would help in the future? So to that end, we would recommend requesting 2 specific reports from the administration. One, focusing on outcomes from drought expenditures and activities, concrete and measurable outcomes. Since we put this report out, the administration did provide an initial report on that, but we would suggest you may want to request follow-up reports as we continue with our drought response activities, and particularly around the Prop 1 expenditures. What have those funds and expenditures yielded? And then the second is a comprehensive report on lessons learned, a more qualitative report, really to formal documentation so that things like staff turnover in departments and hopefully perhaps if there are multiple years before the next drought, hopefully it's been a while, to make sure that those lessons are really documented both for you as policymakers but also for the public, so that reflective exercise takes place, and also so that we make sure that we are starting ahead in the next drought. So that's all I have for you. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? I'd like to add just a quick comment at this time before we hear from our departments. I think one of the things that's been lost in this discussion is, and I think quite naturally, because we are and have been faced with a drought situation, is the fact that for many decades, California really has not paid proper attention to the use of water throughout the state, that we failed before there ever was a drought to recognize that we were overusing a resource that is abundant but limited in the state of California, and that has caused a great deal of damage to aquifers, to water supplies throughout the state. So it's very good that we're having this conversation now, but we need to remember that it shouldn't be just a conversation about drought. It should be a conversation about how we appropriately use long-term, drought or not, a very limited resource that and a recognition that our failure to do so in a variety of ways was leading us down the path of a significant environmental degradation around the state, and given an expanding population in the state, was going to become an even scarcer resource no matter what. So with that said, we'll begin with a report from the Department of Forestry and Fire Protection, and then move through our other 4 departments. But I'd like to ask each of the directors, as you make your presentations, to give us, if you can, some concrete examples of how what the budgetary expenditures have paid for, and how the state is benefiting and will benefit from them. So we'll begin with Director Pimlott. Welcome.
Good morning, Chairman Bloom and members of the committee. Ken Pimlott, Director for CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE's request for drought augmentation is essentially the same as last year, with $77.4 million and over 450 temporary help positions through the end of the calendar year for firefighter surge capacity, and that will include staffing an additional 23 fire engines, additional fire line support positions, add additional defensible space inspectors, and enhance CAL FIRE's air attack capabilities to suppress wildland fires. And essentially, we brought firefighters on early last year. We held firefighters on longer because of the extended fire season. And all of those individuals were directly involved in initial attack fire suppression, essentially really increased our surge capacity to go after every fire and suppress it while it was small. And although we did see a significant number of increasingly damaging and dangerous fires, because of these resources, significant resources, and the efforts of our firefighters and support personnel, we contained over 95% of the fires at 10 acres or less. And again, a significant contribution of the resources, the additional resources provided to the department made us successful in that endeavor. We responded to over 6,000 fires, which is about 1,800 more fires than in a normal year. Over 300,000 acres burned in state responsibility area, which is about 200,000 acres more than we burn on average within the 31 million acres of state responsibility area that CAL FIRE protects. Unfortunately, two of the large fires that grew became two of the 10 most damaging fires in the state's history in terms of structural loss. The Butte Fire in Calaveras County is now the 7th most damaging fire in the state's history, and the Valley Fire in Lake County is the 3rd most damaging fire. And both of those fires, in addition to the damages, also saw life loss to civilian personnel within those communities. And Chairman Bloom, as you know, you had an opportunity within the last month to visit the Valley Fire and see the destruction that the extreme fire conditions we're seeing had on a community and had on the forest environment. Unprecedented fire behavior. We have 30-year firefighting veterans who are to a T telling us they have not seen fire conditions and fire behavior the way we've seen it in the last 2 years, particularly last year. Some of the fires last summer, particularly the Butte and the Valley, moved so quickly. Our efforts were focused on not the initial fire suppression and perimeter control. We were focused on going in and rescuing civilian personnel from their homes. In the case of the Butte Fire, probably the first 24 to 36 hours was literally pulling people to safety out ahead of the quickly advancing fire. Again, very rapid, very extreme and intense fire conditions. The LAO talked about the rain, and obviously we're certainly appreciative of the rainfall. Despite the winter storms bringing rain to certain areas of the state, it is not enough to counteract the overall impacts of 4 years of drought and extremely parched vegetation across the state. There are areas of the state, again, that are dried down so low in moisture content in the vegetation that it will take several winters, like we're having right now, of these kinds of precipitation events to really return vegetation back to a state that is not conducive to the kinds of fire we're seeing right now. The impacts of longer, warmer summers, longer fire seasons. Our fire seasons on average in the West are over 70 days longer, we've noticed over the last 40 years, and scientists are verifying that. So we're seeing the vegetation being exposed to much warmer and drier conditions for longer periods of time. It's making the vegetation extremely susceptible to new ignitions and extreme fire conditions when it burns. But we are taking advantage of the precipitation and the rain events this spring. We're bringing our firefighters on early as supported through the drought augmentation, and they are all actively engaged in fuels treatment and vegetation management activities. They're in prescribed fire. They're working on community-based projects throughout the SRA, supporting communities and community-based fuels reduction and vegetation management projects. In particular, they're focusing in areas around the Sierra that are so hard hit by over 29 million dead trees through the insect-induced tree mortality, which is an epidemic and disaster hitting California. We've also approved over $1.7 million in state responsibility area fire prevention grants to the 6 counties or entities within the 6 counties that are so impacted by tree mortality to get work going on the ground to help protect these communities. So with that concludes, and I can open it up for questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your report. And yes, the trip we took up to the site of the Valley Fire was very illuminating, and I had the opportunity to meet one of the injured firefighters and a number of the other folks who fought that blaze. And I just want to say that meeting with and talking to the firefighters and seeing the extent of the damage and what they had to combat there was an extraordinary experience for me and very, very informative. So thank you for that. And, please let them know again, to thank them for their bravery. There were a number of injuries. I know one very serious injury in particular, and we wish him the best. But again, thank them for serving the state of California. We'll move on to Director Bonham and Department of Fish and Wildlife, and I do want to just call out for everybody here that I know you have another place that you need to be, so we're going to rearrange the schedule a little bit. We're going to move through the presentation of Department of Forestry and Fire Protection after we're done with the drought presentation here, and then move your presentation up to immediately after that.